Can you pass this general Spanish quiz? Let's find out. We're going to do 5 beginner questions, 5 intermediate questions, and 5 advanced questions. Vámonos. Number 1. ¿Cómo se dice apple en español? ¿Naranja, pera o manzana? In this case, it's going to be manzana. Naranja is orange, pera is pear, and manzana is apple. Like I said, we're starting off with the beginner questions, but the test is going to get harder, so make sure you stick around to the end because you might make mistakes on the last ones. Número 2. Yo blank estudiante. Yo estoy estudiante. Yo soy estudiante. Or yo es estudiante. In this case, the correct answer would be soy. When talking about something like being a student, we argue that this is a profession in Spanish. So for example, yo soy un profesor. I am a professor, or un maestro, a teacher. In this case, we'll use ser as a permanent thing because it's technically my job to be a student. So yo soy estudiante. It's tricky because many times ser and estar fall into a gray area. You could argue, okay, but you're a student now, but you might not be in the future. However, when it comes to something like being a student, we will use the verb ser. Okay? Número 3. ¿Cuál es el número 15? Okay, ¿cuál es el número 15? In this case, número 15 is going to be 15. 5 is cinco. 50 is cincuenta. And 15 would be quince. Okay? Número 4. Buenos días, buenos noches, or buenos tardes. In this case, we'll have buenos días. In this case, buenos días is going to be masculine. However, for noches and tardes, we would have buenas. So I could say to you, buenas tardes or buenas noches. Okay? And make sure that it's plural. Okay? Muy bien. Número 5. ¿Cuál es la forma correcta? Okay? Yo hablo español. Yo hablo español. Or yo hablará español. In this case, it will be yo hablo español. Careful with accents here. If I say hablo, it sounds like I'm speaking in the past tense and what we call the preterite. So for example, él habló español. He spoke Spanish. Whereas here, I'm trying to say I speak Spanish. In Spanish, the natural emphasis on a word falls on the second to last vowel. So in this case, here's our last vowel. Remember that vowels are just A, E, I, O, U. Same in Spanish, A, E, I, O, U. So we have, this is our last vowel, and this is our second to last vowel. So naturally, without an accent on this word, the emphasis will fall on the second to last vowel, which in this case is A. So we'll have yo hablo versus yo hablo. Okay? Muy bien. All right, get rid of that. All right, número 6. Now we're on the intermediate questions here. Choose the correct past tense. Ayer blank al cine. Ayer blank al cine. So fui, iba, or ir. In this case, we're going to have fui. Okay, yesterday I went to the movie theater. Many times in Spanish, the word ayer is going to be a trigger phrase for the preterite tense. Remember that in Spanish, the preterite tense is for a one-time action in the past, whereas the imperfect, something like iba, is for an ongoing action in the past. So, yesterday I went to the movie theater. I wasn't going to the movie theater. I didn't used to go to the movie theater. I went. It's a one-time action. Now, if I were to add some extra context here, and I were to say something like ayer iba al cine cuando, and then something else happened. So, yesterday I was going to the movie theater when my dad called me, let's say. Cuando mi papá me llamó. And now, llamó is in the preterite. it's very normal that in Spanish we'll have the imperfect mood going, or imperfect tense going on, and then it will get interrupted by the preterite. So yesterday I was going to the movie theater when my dad called me. In that situation, we could use the imperfect. Okay, but in this case, ayer fui al cine would be the correct answer. Okay? Número 7. ¿Qué significa todavía? Sometimes, still or yet, or suddenly. Todavía, in this case, means still. Sometimes would be a veces. Suddenly would be de repente. And todavía would mean still or yet. So for example, todavía te amo. I still love you. Or no me has dicho todavía. You have yet to tell me, or you still haven't told me. Okay? Número 8. Ellos blank que irse temprano. Okay? Ellos tengan, tiene, or tienen. In this case, it's going to be tienen. Tengan is the subjunctive mood. Remember that in Spanish, the subjunctive is not a tense. It is a mood. We have 3 different moods in Spanish. The indicative, which is the one that we use the most, the subjunctive, which is for things of doubt, and the imperative, which is essentially just commands. So the indicative is for things of fact, whereas the subjunctive is for things of doubt and uncertainty. So in this case, when I say to you, they have to leave early, and we're going to talk about this in a second, this is a fact. I'm telling you, they have to leave early, so therefore we're going to use tienen. Now, what's going on with irse? Why is it irse and not just ir? Well, in this case, ir would mean to go. However, irse, now it's reflexive, would mean, to leave. Okay? To leave. So it's different. Okay? To go versus to leave. So for example, ya me voy. For example, I'm leaving now. Okay? Ya me voy. I am leaving now. So, voy, I go. Me voy, I leave. Okay? Número 9. Choose the correct object pronoun. ¿Tienes la tarea? Sí. Blank tengo. La, le, or lo. In this case, we'll use la. Okay? La tengo. Okay? Why? Well, this is our verb, tienes, and it is directly affecting this object or this noun, which in this case is la tarea. This is what we call a direct object pronoun. We also have what are called indirect object pronouns, something like le, for example. Now, an easy thing to remember is that 99% of the time, when you hear something like le, it's going to represent a person. So if I say le dije, I'm saying I told him or I told her, depending on the context. Or something like les, for example, be representing people. Whereas something like la, for example, I'm gonna just quickly do this again because I kind of cut off the la there. When I say something like la, 9 out of 10 times, it's going to be representing an inanimate object, something that is not a living being, typically not a person. There are certain situations when this is the case, and I can write an example here for you. But in this case, the verb tienes is directly affecting this object or this noun. Therefore, its direct object pronoun is going to be la. Now, a situation when I could say something and use a direct object pronoun to refer to a person is in a case like la quiero, meaning I love her. La is representing, let's say, mi novia, for example. Yo quiero a mi novia. In this case, the verb querer is directly affecting the noun of novia, and therefore she becomes the direct object pronoun. Now that is kind of the 1 out of 10 times when it will be used. But if you're not sure, use la and lo and los and las for objects, and use le and les for people. Okay, número 10. ¿Cuál es el plural correcto? El lápiz becomes los blank. Lápices, lápiz, or lápices. In this case, where we have lápices. Okay? Pretty weird word here. Okay? Muy bien. Now we have 5 more to go. And this is the advanced section. Let's see how you do. Choose the correct subjunctive. Quiero que tú blank más. Okay? Estudiar, estudias, or estudias. In this case, it's going to be estudies. Hold on, I'm going to redo that so I don't block out the E. The reason is because I'm saying quiero que. Just because I want you to study more doesn't mean that you're actually going to do it. This is the idea of the subjunctive mood in Spanish. There is doubt. It's not a fact. It's not a guarantee that you are going to study. Just because I want you to do that doesn't mean you are. So for example, if your doctor recommends that you take pills, it doesn't mean that you're actually going to do it. So if I said to you, mi doctor recomienda que yo tome más pastillas. My doctor recommends that I take more pills, for example. Just because he recommends that doesn't mean I'm actually going to do that. That is the idea of the subjunctive mood. Número 12. Si tuviera tiempo, blank a México. Iré, iría, or ir. In this case, we're going to say iría, okay? This is the imperfect subjunctive. So it's the subjunctive mood being used in the past tense. So if I had time, I would go to Mexico. This is what we call the conditional tense. I would do this, but I don't have time, or I don't have money, or whatever. Now, careful. Don't confuse this with the imperfect. So, with a word like iba, I could translate this as I used to go, I was going, or I could also translate this as I would go. For example, oh, I would go there all the time as a kid, or I'd go there all the time as a kid. However, I do not recommend that you use this translation for the imperfect because many students end up confusing it with this conditional tense. So just focus on this as used to go or was going instead of would. When you see something like the conditional tense, think of that as would. Okay, we have 3 more here. Escoge la opción correcta. No creo que él blank hoy. Okay, so I don't think that he will viene, vendrá, or venga. Okay? In this case, we're going to say venga. Once again, let me stop crossing that out. There we go. Once again, we're using the subjunctive mood. Why? Because I'm saying no creo que. In my reality, there is doubt, and therefore I'm saying I don't think he's going to come, so therefore we're going to use a subjunctive. Now, you might have thought that it would be vendrá. However, we'll use vendrá when we're saying it's fact, right? Like, él vendrá a la fiesta. He will come to the party. Now, I will say, you can use vendrá when asking a question. So, for example, vendrá a la fiesta hoy? May he come to the party? Will he come to the party today? However, when I'm saying something like no creo que, we're going to use the subjunctive in the present tense, which would translate into English in this case, I don't think that he will come today or that he's coming today. Okay? Número 14. ¿Cuál es la traducción correcta? She has been living here for 2 years. ¿Ha vivido aquí por 2 años? ¿Vive aquí desde hace 2 años? Or está viviendo aquí por 2 años. In this case, it's going to be vive aquí desde hace 2 años. Now, you might have thought that the correct answer was A. Now, technically, A is not incorrect. However, it's not the exact translation that we were looking for here. Ha vivido aquí por 2 años means she has lived here for 2 years. It's slightly different than she has been living here. When we say something like that with regards to time, we're actually going to use this present tense, and then we're going to use a word like desde or hace. So, vive aquí hace 2 años would also work, or desde hace. She has lived here since 2 years ago, or she has been living here for 2 years. For sí, está viviendo aquí por 2 años, she is living here for 2 years, but it sounds a bit odd. Okay, and our final one, número 15, completa la frase con un conector avanzado. Estudio todos los días, blank, sigo confundido con el subjuntivo. In this case, we are going to have sin embargo. Now, I'd like to say, you could use the word pero here. Estudio todos los días, pero sigo confundido con el subjuntivo. However, sin embargo sounds a bit better. Sin embargo simply means however. So, I study every day. However, I am still confused with the subjunctive. We can use the verb seguir, meaning to follow or to continue, to mean that you're still feeling a certain way. So, sigo confundido. I am still confused in this case. How'd you do? Leave a comment down below. I hope you've learned something new. I hope this has helped. And if you'd like to learn more Spanish from me, click the link in the video description. Our goal is to help you have a 10-minute conversation in Spanish in 90 days without feeling unconfident after you join the Fluent Spanish Speaker Academy. So check it out by clicking the link in the video description. Muchas gracias. Hasta luego.